Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here, and thanks Nicholas and Paul and Reed Corporate for having us here again. Sandfire Resources, and probably a number of you have, we've either met or heard me present before on Sandfire, but essentially Sandfire is, I suppose if you said what business are we in, we're in the value creation business, the value generation business. That's what we'd like to think we're in. And essentially, you know, it's all about finding quality projects. If you can find a quality project, essentially you'll find the people and you'll find the money. There are four key elements to this presentation to give you a sense of it. One is the operations at DeGrussa, and soon to include the Monty discovery that will be going as material into the DeGrussa mill up in Western Australia there in Meekatharra, optimising that operation. So number one is the operations. Number two is to talk about the potential extension of those operations and cash flow there. Number three is talking about our investment in the USA. We have a copper project we're permitting in the USA. And number four is to touch on business development and other opportunities that we may have in front of us. We've been now operating for we're in our sixth year of operations. $3 billion worth of revenue. We've had, initially when we built the DeGrussa project, we brought on around $400 million worth of debt. We've repaid that off in short order, and at today we're probably close to $200 million in treasury with no debt in the business. Developing pipeline, we love Australia, we love USA in terms of a stable jurisdiction, and we love Canada. We potentially like South America in certain parts as well. So we think they're good places to operate. At the moment we are bringing on stream the new high-grade Monty mine, and to give you some perspective, DeGrussa was an extraordinary discovery. It's what's called a volcanogenic massive sulphide. It was created by a volcano underneath the sea floor, and its grade was over 5% copper. To give you a sense of that, the average copper mine in the world grade is about half of 1% of copper. So the DeGrussa mine grade was over 5%. And then the Monty discovery that was made some 10 kilometres to the east essentially is double that. It's near on 10% copper grade. So it's quite extraordinary. And as I touch on a few things through this presentation, hopefully there's a lot more there to be had. We're developing the Black Butte project in the USA. It's about a 3.5% copper grade quality project, probably the equivalent of about a 4.5% copper grade in Australia. Cost of people, cost of energy, people much lower in the US, cost of capital, infrastructure, those things a lot cheaper than Australia. Australia's a very expensive place to operate. Committed to exploration, and many of the presenters here during this conference all explorers. There are a few of us that are miners, but to get to where we are you had to be an explorer, and the real value in this business, and I think we've just heard it in the previous presentation, it's about exploration. The real value creation, if you get lucky, you may buy something and get the cycle right and you know, pick the gold market and the market went up or the commodity. But fundamentally, to make money in this business, the value creation comes from discovery. And what there's not enough of, people, you know, the wallets get tightened up, is there's not enough for discovery. There's not enough in exploration. It's the hardest thing to do. It's the most subjective thing to do. But it's where the value is created. DeGrussa was one of those discoveries. We were essentially here presenting, we're a 4 or 5 cent stock, and I think we peaked out at just over $9, and actually a couple of weeks ago we traded at near on all-time high of $9.05. So that's what happens from exploration. The execution, yes, we've been able to execute the project and take it into production, but you can get good people to do that, and good engineers and good people to execute things, but the real value is in exploration. I'm going to quickly race through most of this. We've been fairly tight on our capital structure. We had 100 million shares on issue in this company at 4 cents, and today we've got 158 million shares. The last time we raised money in the equity market, I think, was some 6 years ago. We raised about $100 million at about $7. But we went through a very, very rapid share price accretion, and you know, very much similar to the graph you saw before in terms of discovery, it went really, really high. We've been a dividend-paying stock since year 2 of operations. We presently pay, as a guideline, 35% of our net profit as a dividend. That's the average we've been paying pretty much for the last few years, and we'll continue to do that. So we've been a good dividend-paying stock. A market capitalisation today about $1.3 billion, and people sometimes put it in some sort of context where you are at the moment. You know, as far as I'm concerned, out of the operations that we're running at the moment for the next 4.5 years from DeGrussa, hopefully there's longer, essentially it's going to generate about $1 billion after tax in the next 4.5 years, and we've got 200 in the bank. So as far as I'm concerned, we trade today at essentially what is going to be our terminal cash backing at about $1.3 billion, which says to me there's not a lot of value given to us for our exploration potential and upside, and we have much. So cash flow, essentially we went from discovery to production. It was 36 months to our first cash flow. Extraordinary. The average time in Australia is probably 7 years, 8 years, maybe 10 years these days from a discovery to a mine if you're lucky. In the US it's probably 15 on average. Canada's probably halfway in between Australia and the US. It's hard work. It's hard work to get projects up and running, to get them permitted. We've had 5 solid years of production. Our last half year was our best half year in terms of financial performance. The half year we're in at the moment will be better again, and the one after it is going to be probably our best of all time as a consequence of rising commodity physical production of copper units and essentially a fairly consistent commodity price. But as you can see from those numbers, really strong financial numbers, and we worked hard, very disciplined to actually pay off the debt and all those things and pay dividends from very early on in the piece. Copper market, we've heard lots of stories about lithium and various other things in the battery market. I don't really know anything about predicting the future, but the copper market looks pretty solid. It's solid, it's at $3 a pound. It looks solid, the prognosis looks pretty good going forward. The demand for highly conductive material, which is copper, is strong. The car market, if we get excited about the EV market, essentially I think there's 5 or 6 times more copper than in a current combustion engine car. In an EV car, you'll need 5 or 6 times more copper in the car. So things, and there's lots of other demands obviously for copper, but things like not only urbanisation of China, but the rise of the middle class in China is another big demand for quality products and better standards of living. And in fact, all these raw materials, you see there'll be huge demand and consistent demand going forward. Not necessarily explosive, but consistent long-term demand. And in most of these commodities, they're not that plentiful. They're very difficult to replenish as well. So there's always a challenge. We're operating in Western Australia where we have DeGrussa now. Monty will come on stream. US Black Butte project, and we've got a number of exploration projects in the eastern seaboard. To give you a sense of it, just to, I suppose, remember, DeGrussa was an open pit and an underground mine that we developed simultaneously. It is now 100% underground. What you see there are 4 lenses of mineralisation, and the average grade there is over 5%. As I said, we've got about 4.5 years of mine life at the moment. We've recently extended it by 9 months, and our challenge is to continue to add mine life. The project had a 7-year mine life when we started. It's been running for 6 years. So we've essentially increased the mine life by 50% so far, and we'd like to think there's good opportunity to extend it even further. Monty, without getting into any detail, it's 10 kilometres to the east essentially. It's double the grade. It's small, it's highly valuable, and as that goes into production now, this is a few photographs here and just showing you a plan view of a decline to the deposit. Essentially that ore will be coming out of Monty towards the end of this calendar year, and it'll be blended. It'll be like icing going on the cake. We'll be feeding our mill at DeGrussa, which will stay in size the same. About 80% of DeGrussa ore feed at 4.5% copper, and putting another 20% of Monty, which will be running at about 9.5% copper. So overall we have a higher feed grade of copper, and as a consequence of that, we'll have more copper coming out of the back end. The Monty, just having a look at the surface works, ventilation, shaft, and a bit of work going underground. In terms of numbers going forward, this is over the next couple of years, and we go out to 2022 and hopefully longer. You'll see that sort of prediction in terms of copper production, those hatched areas to the right there, and the copper production profile. It's been about mid-60s. It's going up to probably close to high 60s, low 70s, and then in that year there, 20 certainly, somewhere in the order of high 70,000 tonnes of copper, and that's a big number. Your 70,000 tonnes of copper, it's close to nearly over 9,000 Aussie. It's producing a lot of cash flow out of this mine. Your operating costs will go down per unit, and the margin we make and the free cash flow that we'll generate will be extensive. In addition to what we have got, there's a little bit of near mine opportunities in those 3 columns without getting into detail. There's about 200,000 tonnes of copper not in the present mine plan. So if we're able to convert some of that into the mine plan, hopefully we'll get another year, another 2 years from what we presently know. So from those three pillars, near mine potential, there's about 50,000 tonnes of copper. Oxide copper, there's 34,000 tonnes of copper. And we have another little project that we bought called Thaduna, which has got 150,000 tonnes of copper, all various grades, but all opportunity to be further feed to the mill. And as we just heard previously, it's as soon as you put a tonne of ore in the mill, you're looking for the next one. You're in a depleting business. It's always hard work to replenish. Replenish is always hard work. US, just to touch on this, we made this investment some 4 years ago, thereabouts. We've invested about $40 million to date. We own 78% of the company. It's also just had a name change to be aligned with us. It's called Sandfire America. It's listed on the Toronto Venture Board. We would like to own 100% of it, and I'm sure at some point in time we will, at the right time. But this project sits in the top 10 projects in the world in terms of grade, a copper grade that's undeveloped. It's a quality project. It's got a lot of exploration potential as well, and it's a project that was discovered in the late 70s, early 80s by Teck Kaminko, and really got left behind. It was too small, it was unloved, it was picked up by a junior, and they worked it for a while, and then essentially when the market was very quiet, they were unable to raise funds, and we came in and have been able to invest. The interesting thing is when you the elevator pitch is 600,000 tonnes of copper, what's that worth? Well, in US dollars, over $4 billion. It's going to cost $2 billion to pay for operating costs. You pay about $1 billion in federal, state and provincial taxes. There's about $1 billion left over. If you discount that, cut it in half, it's worth $500 million. We own 80%. It's worth $400 million to us. That's the order of magnitude what the project today is worth if it's permitted. So the work at the moment, we're in the final stages of permitting the project. And hopefully towards the end of this year, early next year, we'll come out with that final permit, and then we'll start works on the ground. The really interesting thing about this project, it's in Montana, which was a mining province, and the interesting thing about Montana, there hasn't been a new permit issued for quite some time. We see it using this as a bit of a beachhead, but strategically it's about creating value out of this project, but actually using it as a platform to go and do other things in North America. And this will be a world first, like DeGrussa is in many aspects. For example, we have the largest off-grid solar farm in the world at a mine site up at DeGrussa. This project here will be a guaranteed 100% reclaimed site and 100% return to prior use. We'll also be using a tailings facility storage called cemented tailings, which will be ultimately buried, and the land will go back to 100% prior use. So it'll be a world first in many regards. Just in the last couple of minutes, I just want to talk about exploration. What you can see here on this graph is what we've got back in Western Australia now at DeGrussa, and up on my right is where we started life and where we made the DeGrussa discovery here. Essentially, we had this little bit of ground here, and now we control everything you see in colour on that map. The rest of the ground is pegged by others, but we have either 100% outright or the ability to control all of that ground. We have something like 6,200 square kilometres we're exploring, and exploring aggressively. We'll spend $30 million here, I think, this year, and our particular focus is essentially, as we focus in a little bit more, is in this trend down through here. And recently, we signed a little deal with a company called RRS, the old R&I, and we're having a little bit of fun up here, made some interesting copper intersections just here. So we like this trend. There's a trend going up through DeGrussa, across to Monty, and then back down again, and that is our focus of attention. We'll be spending a lot of work on there. We're doing a lot of work over the next few months. So the recent announcement we wouldn't have made if it was just a Sandfire wholly owned project. It wouldn't have been something that was material for us at that stage, but for Aurus it was material, and essentially it's right on the border of Aurus's ground, Enterprise, and our ground 100%, and it's really interesting geology. It's the first time we've seen the same sort of geology that we've seen around DeGrussa and around Monty, which is this volcanic massive sulfide type of material. So these first sulfides we've seen away from the two known discoveries has been in this region. It looks very, very, very exciting geologically, and we are busy working away. And so I think it's a case of, when I put it in perspective, and I suppose the important point to note is, when we have seen this geology before, we've intersected copper mineralisation, and it's been high grade. So time will tell whether we get there, but we're very excited by it. To give you some sort of perspective is, if we found another Monty discovery equivalent of, it's probably worth $2 a share to Sandfire. If we found half a degrusser that Discovery originally made, it's probably worth $4 a share to Sandfire. And if we made a degrusser Discovery identical, it probably doubles our share price, to give you a sense of how could you translate it into value. And given we've got $400 million worth of facilities, plant and equipment there, we can easily translate it into value, and we have got a low cost of operating. That's essentially it for me. We've got a little bit of ground around the rest of Australia. No need to mention it. We're busy exploring there as well. But very much consistent, strong balance sheet with $200 million, really growing strong free cash flow, over $1 billion after tax in the next 4 years. And we will be busy exploring, looking to unlock value. And as I said before, we're in the value generation business. So thanks very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you later.